One of the things that I write about in The Road from Ruin is, as a hopeful sign, is that this extraordinary flowering of partnerships between non-profits, NGOs, and business to actually try and jointly figure out some solutions to the problems that are facing us. And one of the examples that I profile in the book is environmental defense and its partnerships, particularly with two of the corporate entities that probably had one of the, in their time, have had some of the more horrendous things written about them in the press. One is Walmart, the beast of Bentonville, and the other is KKR, the firm famously known as Barbarians at the Gate in the 1980s for its takeover of RJR Nabisco. And Fred, Krupp, you're president of Environmental Defense, and have built up a great reputation as an NGO with tremendous integrity over the years. So what on earth are you doing in bed with the beast and the barbarian? And how did that come about, and is it working?
Well, it's where the fun is, Matthew. The whole idea is to change the world. And so if you want to change the world, it's important to work with some of the big forces in the world. And that includes a major private equity firm like KKR. And that includes the biggest retail company and one of the biggest companies in the world, Walmart. And we've been impressed with both of them and their commitment to making real and substantive changes.
So how did it come about? How did they approach you? What did you approach them?
Well, the stories are different. With KKR, we had for a long time been campaigning against the plans of the TXU utility, a big utility in Texas, was proposing, to build 11 new coal-fired power plants. We were leading a nationwide campaign in cyberspace, sending out weekly electronic newsletters to journalists like yourself, saying this is an abomination. At the time, unbeknownst to us, KKR and TPG were looking to purchase TXU, and so they approached us to say, okay, we're thinking of purchasing this big utility. Are there some terms that you could bless? And they actually told us, Bill Riley from TPG told us that unless they could find a way to configure the deal so that we could bless it from a carbon standpoint, they would not go forward. And that began our negotiations with them to figure out a way to go forward. They ended up canceling 8 of the 11 coal-fired power plants that were on the drawing board, ended up committing over $400 million to solar and wind power projects, and a similar amount to energy efficiency projects, and also to support national climate legislation. So with all that in place, we were happy to praise their purchase agreement as that they would be much better owners than the prior management.
And then out of that has come a much deeper relationship.
Out of that has come a much deeper relationship. We've now been looking at part of their portfolio. They own a whole lot of companies, including Dollar General and Hertz Rent-A-Car, and we've started with just a few of the companies, finding things that can save them money while reducing the carbon footprint. You know, as so often the case in this particular issue of greenhouse gases, is they represent many times, not always, but many times waste. And when you squeeze that waste out of the atmosphere, you're also generating millions and millions of dollars for their investors.
And then what about Walmart? How did you get involved with them?
Walmart management really recognized that the environment was a big issue and they wanted to get ahead of it. And the way it's been explained to me by the former CEO, Lee Scott, is that initially he thought about this from a defensive posture, that he did not want to get behind the issue the way perhaps they had some of the labor issues, and wanted to get ahead of the environmental issue, but along the road of educating himself, which included a couple of days traveling with me to the White Mountains of New Hampshire to learn about global warming and how it was affecting maple trees up there, and out to Kansas to visit with corn farmers and changes that they could make to sequester carbon in the soil. Along the way, he had this epiphany that getting ahead of these issues actually could be a good offensive strategy and good for business. And so around that time, they had initially been talking with Conservation International and the good folks there, and they invited other environmental groups into the conversation. And we have ended up, I think we're the only environmental group now that has, a national environmental group that actually has staff stationed full-time in Bentonville. And we walk in and out of the Walmart offices going to whatever meetings we want, really, to advise them on how to take their immense supply chain and get them to be greener. And we start on the issue of carbon. We're starting with the products that the manufacturer of which generates the most carbon pollution, or the use of which generates the most, and we will work our way down from there. But they've made a pledge now to reduce 20 million tons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, from emissions, over the next 5 years, and it'll be like taking almost 4 million vehicles off the road. So it's a big deal, and I can tell you, Matthew, we are being flooded with phone calls from vendors, and Walmart itself is even more inundated, who want to find out, okay, if this is going to be a new criteria as to what determines whether or not we get shelf space, we want to know what this criteria is and what we can do to meet or exceed expectations. So the ripple effects from what Walmart is up to are phenomenal.
So how do you as an NGO decide whether or not to get into bed with a particular company?
Well, for us, the most important thing is the results. So we look for companies that can generate big results, and oftentimes they tend, like McDonald's, to be, who we worked with. That was our first big corporate partnership.
That was after they were being accused of having terrible packaging and so forth.
Yes, we worked with them to resolve the packaging issue, and then we went on to work with them again and again in the decade of the 90s, and have continued to work with them more recently. They've done great things like reduce the amount of antibiotics that are used to raise the chickens that go into their sandwiches. Now, this may seem, antibiotics and chickens, that's a little thing, but it turns out that we have a problem in this country and around the world of using too many antibiotics, so the bugs get resistant. So sometimes when you go to the hospital, the antibiotic of last resort, like in the whole class of antibiotics called fluoroquinolones, don't work anymore. And that's literally a life or death thing. And McDonald's, working with us and their suppliers and the pharmaceutical industry, figured out a way to specify that the people that raised poultry for them would reduce their use of antibiotics by 90%. That was already a few years ago, Matthew, so now we know that not only has the industry complied with that, but not only to serve McDonald's, it's become all the industry leaders producing poultry have reduced antibiotics use by a tremendous amount. And most antibiotics in this country actually are used on farm animals. 70% of antibiotics are used in agriculture, not on people. 70% of antibiotics by weight. So that means we've really attacked a big part of the problem by working in partnership with McDonald's. And the beauty of it is we didn't have to go to Congress. We didn't have to beg a politician to help us. Not that I'm against that, but a lot of times you can only solve these problems, and the antibiotic problem included. We do need legislation in this country, but when we can have a huge outscale impact by working directly with a company, that's the way to be truest to the people that donate money to us, because we're getting results without the vagaries that sometimes have been known to happen in Washington.
Now, do you feel that amongst, your friends who are activists, are you regarded as having sold out in some way by being willing to work with these companies?
I've been subjected to praise and criticism of all stripes, Matthew, over my years, but I think what ultimately convinces people when they look at our work that it's important is the results. So the words really don't matter, but when you can talk about FedEx reinventing their truck so it's 96% less soot, particulates coming out of it, 90% cleaner in terms of, or 70% cleaner rather in terms of nitrogen, 50% more fuel efficient. That's a big deal, and there's now over 100 corporate truck fleets using hybrid clean diesels that are dramatically cleaner thanks to the innovative leadership of FedEx and that first project we did with them. So it's the results that our work should be judged on, and I'm happy to let that be the case.
And you look at it, I mean, if you're looking at KKR or Walmart and you're seeing that they're saving hundreds of millions of dollars and their profits are going up, I mean, does it not frustrate you that you're not getting some of that? I mean, because you don't take any money at all from companies.
No, we don't take money from our corporate partners. We decided early on in our work with Walmart that we wanted to differentiate ourselves from Bain & Company or McKinsey or other consultants. And we thought it would be better for us and better for the companies we worked with to keep our good name and reputation and to be above reproach. And so early on, we actually insisted with McDonald's that they sign an agreement that we wouldn't accept any type of funding before, during, after. We wouldn't even accept a free hamburger in their restaurants. And it's puzzled many of our donors that this could be an income stream for you. This is so impractical. But I think it stood this test of time that, people don't have to wonder about our motivations, and we're free when a project doesn't work out, and some of them haven't. We are free to criticize the company, and I hope that doesn't happen too often. It's not something that...
What's the most notable example?
Well, when we tried to work with GM years ago, over a decade ago, to come up with a system that they could be for to make cars more fuel efficient, they weren't ready at that time, and that partnership agreement was signed and ultimately broke up, and that would be the most notable example.
Obviously the deal that you were involved with first with KKR, the TXU acquisition, which is now being renamed as something...
Energy Futures.
Energy Futures, something positive and uplifting. So that's actually turned out to be a disastrous deal for KKR, according to the press reports, and talk that the debt is trading at 80 cents on the dollar, and angry pension funds, and may end up going to bankruptcy if the natural gas prices don't pick up. I mean,
anyone who looks at me for financial advice needs to have their heads examined.
Right, but you're now locked into a deal which could turn out to be seen as not a very good deal, or they may be under financial pressure to back away from.
Well,
the key for us, how do you handle
the key
that?
for us isn't whether it's profitable or not. Those decisions are made by the folks at KKR or TPG. The key for us is, do they live up to their environmental promises? And that, I can tell you, they have been doing. So this deal is paying dividends for the climate and for the environment. And, ultimately, that's what I care about. Ideally, the companies we work with, whether it's FedEx or McDonald's, are also Walmart profitable, because that makes them better examples. And I hope that KKR will turn that one around too.
I know with Walmart, there's certainly been a culture change within the company where a lot of the employees are buying into the mission. And there's been all these sort of personal sustainability projects and things of that kind. Are you seeing similar change at KKR in terms of the private equity guys embracing this?
Yes, it's amazing when you go into these cultures and they figure out that both the public and governments are increasingly demanding green products and processes, that when people figure that out, whether it's at Walmart or KKR, they get into it because this is something they want to do, they feel good about doing, and suddenly By and large, not always, but by and large, there's a strong business case to be made. So when I go to Walmart and I listen to the stories, substantive stories about changing the TV sets, that they'll still sell flat screen TVs, but they are switching over their shelf space to the ones that are by far more energy efficient. And they're getting rid of the TVs that are energy hogs. And they're so proud of that. That it's really fun to go there. And the same thing with KKR. It's not so much the people at KKR headquarters are very good to work with, but the interesting thing is company by company, as the individual companies embrace change and investigate the things that they can do, that's the fun part, because the individual companies, in the case of KKR, really are running the show.
How do you balance advocacy with actually practically helping companies change?
Well, Matthew, the whole idea is to bring about real-world results. So we see these projects, these partnerships, as part of advocacy. It's a different tool. You know, in the beginning, when the Environmental Defense Fund was founded, the slogan was "Sue the bastards." So there was one big tool, and we would take it out and use that tool. When who said when you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail? But over the years, and even before I arrived at EDF 25 years ago, there started to be this idea that positive incentives, whether it's praise or financial incentives, emissions trading, that if you could align incentives with doing the right thing, you could get a lot more done than through lawsuits. If companies, any company you can think of, if it had to change the world through using lawsuits, it's a pretty limited tool. So nowadays, less than 5%, I don't know if it's 3% of our work is lawsuits. We still do take lawsuits when we need to. We took Jim Rogers and Duke Energy to court, and we won in the Supreme Court on the new source review standards 9-0. The Supreme Court just a couple of years ago. At the same time, though, we have a partnership with Duke Energy in U.S. CAP advocating some common principles for Congress to go forward on climate legislation.
And did Jim Rogers never kind of try and lean on you and say, well, drop the lawsuit?
Never once. We have friendly conversations about our differences, but I think the environmental community is coming of age just like business is, and there's areas that you agree to disagree and areas that you agree to cooperate. So I think these partnerships are another form of advocacy, another form of changing the world, and turns out, maybe because they hadn't been utilized so much until about 1990 when we did that first project with McDonald's, it turns out that they're a lot more productive, perhaps because they had been underutilized.
What's the hardest challenge you face in making a partnership like that work?
Well, in the beginning, Matthew, it literally was explaining that we didn't want to take money. I think there were at least some folks at McDonald's, it's fair to say, who would have been more comfortable working with us if we had been on the payroll. And it actually held up getting a signed agreement for a while. But nowadays, I would say, just focusing on getting results, and very importantly is the buy-in of the CEO. We try not to undertake any project with a company unless we know that the CEO of that company really is committed. Because before we had that philosophy, we sometimes surprised the CEO in a way that wasn't helpful for the project.
I'm going to throw it open to see if we have any questions in the audience. Was there someone?
It's on the right side.
Oh, yes, someone down here. Chris.
Thanks. Chris McDonald, the Business Ethics Blog. Fred, Matthew asked you about how it is that you go about selecting companies to work with. I'd like to ask the reverse question. What advice would you give to companies about how to choose NGOs to partner with?
Well, I know the companies that decide to partner with us do it after talking to the other companies that we've had experience with. And that would be my recommendation for companies looking to partner with any NGO is, what's the track record? Talk is easy, but just when you're interviewing anyone that you're going to potentially work with or partner with, find out the track record.
The question just behind.
My name is Meher. I'm a graduate student at Cornell. My question is that most corporations situate their production processes in developing countries, which not only have limited ability to enforce environmental standards, but also there's lesser demand from the population because there's so many other pressing issues to take care of. How do you convince corporations in such a context to care about the environment where they can get by without any repercussions if they don't press for commitment to climate change and environment?
Well, as you know, it's hard to generalize about developing countries. Certainly, there's been an enormous demand for clean environment in India. There's been lots of issues about water pollution that have come up with regard to bottling factories. In China, as air pollution has gotten worse, I think there is a big demand from the citizens for clean air. And depending on which country we're talking about, in China, they did not have substantial penalties for water pollution, but they have now revised the law. It used to be, $25,000 a year for a violation. So in some cases, water treatment facilities were built but not turned on. When this was brought to the government's attention, we also pointed out that they could change the situation if they just changed 2 words in the law to $25,000 a day. And they did. And so there's a massive enforcement campaign going on now in China on water pollution. So it's hard to generalize, but one of the things that even in those countries that don't yet see a demand for environmental protection is true, I think, is that actions by companies like Walmart informing their suppliers that they're going to be judged in part by how much carbon pollution they take out of the sky, I think that will have implications because Walmart has something very precious that these vendors want, which is shelf space. And ultimately, when a big buyer like Walmart says that this is an interest, suddenly vendors become a lot more interested in cooperative.
Now, presumably, all this extra work you've been doing, you had to grow quite fast as an organization. Is that right? And how are you funded?
Over the years, we have grown from, when I started, we had 40 employees. Today, we have almost 400. We're funded by private contributions, and I'm proud, Matthew, that in the United States, we get funded from the left and the right, from conservative and liberal foundations.
But individual donations?
Individual donations as well as foundations. We take almost no corporate money unless it's a company that doesn't make anything, basically.
Like who?
Like who? The Newman's Own Foundation would be an example of, they get royalties from the sale of products. We have taken money from Newman's Own Foundation would be an example. And out of a budget nowadays of, I think we raised $120 million last year, our total corporate donations are less than $500,000, so it's really de minimis. And we get support from over 700,000 members in the United States, some around the world, as well as from major individual donations, people that just like our non-ideological approach to getting results.
Is there another question right at the front here?
Hi, Joe Weiss, White & Case, a law firm. I was just reading that average lawyer in the U.S. uses 100,000 pieces of paper a year, yet they're really oblivious to this. What advice do you have for those with professional service firms to make this an imperative, And which firms would you point us to for the best practices today?
We have done some work on the paper issue, and I can't tell you offhand which firms are the best, but but we do have online something called the Environmental Innovation Exchange, which takes the best practices, what we do with our partners, and a lot of best practices that we learn about but haven't been involved in, and we publicize them on that website so the learning can be spread. The Environment Innovation Exchange. It's very rich with examples.
I want to talk a bit about the policy environment in which you're operating, because companies can do a certain amount themselves in partnership with you, but we're looking at the Copenhagen process having failed, apparently. America's failure to pass climate change legislation being a key contributor to that. Can business play a role in shifting that? Are you becoming more optimistic about change?
Very definitely, Matthew. Really what's amazing as we sit here on March 15th, 2010, is that climate change and energy legislation in the United States, which people had presumed was dead, has really come back roaring. And thanks to Senator Graham, Republican conservative from South Carolina, Senator Lieberman, Senator Kerry, there's a massive effort now underway involving everyone from the Chamber of Commerce to the environmental groups. And I think we are going to see a new hybrid approach, not exactly what I would have recommended, but I think something that will be a very big step forward for this country. I think we're going to see a bill come out of these three senators within the next week or two. And it really is, it's fascinating how the pressure to get 60 votes has resulted, I think will result in a conglomeration of ideas, including ideas to make America less energy dependent, will include more drilling for fossil fuels, will include some incentives for nuclear power, which is a low-carbon form of energy, although from my perspective there's problems that still need to be solved, but also treat each sector differently. And I think you're going to see a real head of steam for climate and energy legislation develop just in the next few weeks. So keep one eye peeled, because I know it sounds surprising, but the amount of energy in the system from companies that want certainty. They say, just tell us the rules. Right now, billions of dollars of projects are stalled. Lots of jobs are not being created in America because any of these big utilities, each of them with tens of billions of dollars of capital construction budgets, they've put a freeze on projects because they don't know what to build. They don't know what the price of carbon is going to be, and they don't know how much they're going to be required to take out of the system. So because of that and the need and also the commitment of the president, this thing has come back to life. Really, President Obama convened 14 senators last Tuesday, just about a week ago, in the White House, a bipartisan group. I think there were 6 or 7 Republican senators there. And this is the untold story, but I think it's very encouraging.
Unfortunately, I think we're almost out of time. One last question. Is there a company out there that you look at that you would really love to be able to be invited in to get to grips with?
Well, if there is, I'll probably just make a phone call quietly, Matthew, instead of announcing it publicly.
Come on. Not one in the world that's out there that you would...
Well, if you think about the biggest companies in the world that have the most impact on the planet, and those are the ones we want to work on. Work with and on.
Well, I think on that note, thank you very much. A very inspiring and hopeful story, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew.